Welcome to the Gary Null Show, a program designed to enhance mental, physical, and spiritual well-being through science and the wisdom of the ages. Let us take you on a journey of empowerment. Sit back, relax, and get ready to change your life for good.
Hi everyone, I'm Gary Null, and I'd like to welcome you to the Gary Null Show, where each week this is the place to watch if you want to see the latest in self-empowerment, self-healing, and cutting-edge information. Today we have a very important topic. It'll be in several parts. It is the drugging of our children. Each day, millions of American children are waking up and forced to take a prescription drug because they've been given a diagnosis, ADD or ADHD. Is the diagnosis accurate? Are the drugs really helping people? Or has, as some claimed, psychiatry created a fictitious disease in order to help pharmaceutical companies sell drugs? Sound cynical? Sound implausible? Well, let's take a look.
On the morning of April 10th, 2001, I remember waking up in the morning, about 6, my normal time. Didn't really feel very good, didn't feel like I was up to going to school that morning, so I thought I might, sleep in until about third period, which started around 11. So I set my alarm clock for 11 o'clock, and next thing I remember is waking up in the Juvenile Detention Center in Ephrata, Washington. What went through my mind when I first realized where I was, where am I at? What am I doing here? What happened today? What went wrong? They asked me if I knew why I was there, and I had no idea. I asked them what had happened, and they told me that I had taken a gun to my third period class and held them hostage for a number of minutes.
What bothers me about this whole thing is that now we know that Corey was hallucinating on Paxil just a month after he went on them. Corey is afraid to tell us about the hallucinations and the bad dreams because he thought he was going crazy. This is a Mormon boy who had never smoked or drank, never used illegal drugs, didn't know what a hallucination was from Adam.
The first drug was Ritalin, and that was really, really bad. Because they told my mom that I had ADD, ADHD. They started focusing on me and, forgot about everybody else, and they just looked at me and focused on me. And it makes you feel like you're really, really tired, you don't want to eat.
Between 1995 and 2000, the number of prescriptions of psychotropic drugs of all kinds for kids more than doubled.
The problem with being a child in America today compared to 20 or 30 years ago is that if you are different, if you are agitated, if you are extremely active, you will fall under the gaze of the helping professions, the so-called helping professions.
I don't remember anyone I went to school with being on a mind-altering medication. But now, the number of children on drugs in this country is astronomical.
Jefferson County 911. Yes, I'm a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun.
Eric Harris was taking the antidepressant Luvox for a full year while he developed all his bizarre and violent fantasies.
And the school is in a panic, and I'm in the library. I've got students down under the tables, kids. Heads under the tables.
I believe that Eric Harris was literally driven crazy, as so many other children have been, while taking this antidepressant drug.
I think the pharmaceutical companies realized a while ago that there were huge profits to be made on playing on parents' fears and also playing on a generation of parents that was looking for the convenient way to raise their children.
ADHD is a means of making paying patients out of normal individuals. And once they are given a prescription and put on medications that are virtually never discontinued, they have lifetime paying patients. That's what's behind the epidemic.
Medication is an answer that can be helpful to some people some of the time.
There needs to be a balance between the interaction of biological treatments and psychological treatments.
I didn't have Brian diagnosed with ADHD until he was in the 5th grade. And that led, of course, to prescriptions. And when those prescriptions didn't work, that led to more prescriptions. And the more prescriptions he got, the more frustrated that we all got. He couldn't get better, he couldn't help himself. He got angry, and the angrier he got, the more violent he got.
Each morning in the United States, between 6 and 7 million children are given a prescription medication before they can go to school. Many of them are taking Ritalin or other amphetamines.
More and more aspects of human behavior, human distress, just general unhappiness is becoming medicalized. It's being made into diseases. This culture has grown in parallel with the growth of the pharmaceuticals industry and its investment in psychotropic drugs, that is, drugs that affect the psyche, the mind, the brain.
By far the majority of psychiatric prescriptions for children are given for attention deficit disorder, ADD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD.
One of the alarming concerns I have both as a parent and as a physician is that there is much misdiagnosis and overprescription of medication, and inappropriate prescription of medication, changing these children's lives forever for the worse.
Why didn't my generation, the baby boomer generation, have this? Why didn't we have thousands of kids committing suicide when I was going to school or you were going to school? Why didn't we have kids walking to schools like this one behind us and shooting up their classmates for no apparent reason?
My son Michael pretty much had a very bad experience in public school, along with my family. He started kindergarten, and I got a lot of phone calls that he was not sitting in his chair. He was not on task, as the teacher said.
As a classroom teacher, you're given a list of 9 categories. If a child demonstrates 6 of these manifestations in these categories, for example, can't sit in his seat, fidgets, jumping out of his chair, doesn't wait his turn, things that are commonly done with youngsters who are energetic. You find 6 out of those 9, and that child can be labeled as ADD, meaning attention deficit, a shortage of, he can't focus his attention.
One of the problems with the diagnosis for ADHD is that it's very subjective. It's basically a list of behaviors.
There's very clearly at least 100 different problems that can look like ADHD. I do believe it exists and it's a genetic disorder, but it's a diagnosis of exclusion. You rule out everything else first before you even consider it. And that's not what we see being done today.
Parenting style is not a cause of ADD and ADHD. There are several causes. One of them we know of is hereditary. For example, if the parents have attention deficit disorder or ADHD or those kinds of symptoms, their children are more likely to experience those symptoms as well. There are also several prenatal causes for ADHD, as well as low birth weight, if the mother was smoking or drinking during her pregnancy, and things like that can also have an impact on causing ADHD. But it's very important for people to understand that parenting style is not a cause of ADD or ADHD. At the same time, parenting style can, with a child who has attentional problems and hyperactive problems, cause greater difficulties, and at the same time can also improve the situation a great deal.
When my little boy was 6 years old, when he first started kindergarten, on his very first day of school, the school kept calling me up at work 10, 20 times saying, "Vincent won't sit still, or we have a problem with your son." And they called me in for a meeting with the principal, a social worker, psychologist, and the teacher, and they said, "You're either going to have to put your son on Ritalin, or we're going to put him in a school for special needs children.
My name is Riley.
Riley?
I love cars and trucks and trains.
Do you?
I like race cars.
The main symptom under hyperactivity, the one that is considered by the Psychiatric Association manual to have the most power, the symptom is, quote, often fidgets with hands or feet or squirms in seat. That's it. That is the most powerful symptom.
Under impulsivity, the first criteria is often blurts out answers before questions have been completed. And under inattention, the first criteria is often fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes in schoolwork or other activities. And if you look at how this diagnosis has been formulated, it's to refine disruptive classroom behavior with the purpose of being able to medicate, under these psychiatric guidelines.
Michael, to hear the experts say that if you manifest any number of symptoms like easily distracted, blurting out an answer before you're asked, daydreaming and looking out the window, fidgeting at your desk, unable to sit still, that these are symptoms of this mental disorder called ADHD. What do you think about that?
That was me. All those things were me. Seriously, if this had been the way things were run back when I was growing up, always asking questions, always seeming a bit agitated, always, my mind drifting off into some, creative place. I'll tell you, they would have had me so doped up, you guys never even would have heard of me. There never would have been a Roger and me or anything else.
First grade, when the work got a little more difficult and they had a lot longer periods of sitting down behind a desk. At that point, I was going through a divorce, and he had some emotional issues with the divorce and the custody pursuit that was ongoing at that point. And I was called in several times by the school principal because of his behavior, because he was distracted, he wasn't focusing, he wasn't sitting down doing his work, wandering around. And at one point she told me she knew I was going through family counseling with him, but counseling was very slow, and that if I didn't opt for medication, that she would find a way to transfer him out to a special education center.
Some parents are very resistant to giving their children medication. The most effective form of treatment for attention deficit disorder is a combination of psychotropic medication along with cognitive behavioral therapy. Research has consistently supported this.
There's a saying in medicine that if all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. So if a child comes in and they're inattentive, they must have ADHD, which is simply not true. We see kids who are reacting to the divorce of parents. They become oppositional or depressed or irritable because they're reacting to a chaotic home life.
A child is liable to be diagnosed ADHD if he or she steps out of line, speaks out of turn. In short, just about any sort of disorderly conduct would beget on the part of a teacher a suspicion of ADHD, or might even lead to that teacher making such a diagnosis.
Just describing a behavior is not getting necessarily to the underlying cause of what the problem is. I see children that are brought in here by their parents. I'll give you an example. I have an attorney who brought her 5-year-old daughter in here to be seen by me, who was told that she had hyperactivity and attention deficit, and it turned out that this child had allergies to certain foods. And when these allergies in the foods and also the environment were handled, the symptoms went totally away.
It is now widely recognized that the symptoms of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder are shared by many children exposed to PCBs, the polychlorinated biphenyls, and lead. In 1996, Herbert L. Needleman published a report in the Journal of the American Medical Association revealing a strong link between lead in children's bones and delinquent behavior. Several studies since 1996 have confirmed what Needleman found. Many studies showed that children exposed to lead not only had learning problems, but also were distractible, disorganized, impulsive, and restless, the hallmarks of attention deficit disorder. In short, the mechanisms that regulates attention and self-control is damaged by lead. How many students have you seen would come to school bouncing off the walls in the morning, and you change their diet or make suggestions to parents, get them off sugar, get them off dairy, and then they come back and they're okay? Does that happen?
Yes. Get them off TV.
Yeah. Get them off TV?
Yeah.
I used to think, 10, 15 years ago, when we were raising our daughter, people would pop The Little Mermaid in the VCR. The kid would watch it 29 times, and that became, the pacifier.
And no wonder they can't pay attention to something for 20 minutes, because when they're watching television, their brains are becoming lazy from the visual input that they're getting from television.
Can tell what child watches television before he comes to school in the morning. Can tell you as they walk in the door.
How? Why?
Because they're out of control. They're not being themselves. They're being some character. They're acting in a way that's obviously not them.
What we have to remember is that children's behavior is a product of what they see in their homes. In this fast-paced society, their parents are often on the cell phones, pacing back and forth. Well, the child's not blind. The child's going to see that, and the child is going to imitate what the parent is doing.
I now long for the days when I saw people popping The Little Mermaid in 29 times as the pacifier. Because that's not the pacifier now. The pacifier now is pop a pill in their mouth.
Isn't it amazing that suddenly there's a new disease that jumped over all these, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, our generation, and suddenly our kids, or the first generation, get this new disease.
Right, and of course they call it genetic.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
It's likely that a 10-year-old boy in 1960 would not be supervised by as many adults as he is supervised today. From the moment he wakes up today, he is looked at and observed and driven and taken different places, whereas probably in 1960 he would get a chance to run around with his friends for 2-3 hours. There was an increased sense of perhaps safety that the parents felt, and this child would be interacting with other people, would not be spending most of his time either in darkened rooms in movies or watching television or playing by himself with electronic toys. So there would be much more social interaction in that child's life than you would see today.
ADD is not new. ADD was actually described over 100 years ago by a pediatrician who described a group of kids who had short attention spans, were impulsive and hyperactive. Ritalin was actually released in the United States in the early 1950s, so we've known ADD has been around for a long time. However, there are clear societal factors that are increasing the expression of ADD. As we require kids to stay in school longer to get the best jobs, ADD kids drop out first. And if they drop out of school first, they have babies first. So actually ADD families have more families per 100 years, so they'll have 5 generations per 100 years, where a non-ADD family will only have 4.
My grandfather was born 3 years after the Civil War. That's my grandfather. I'm still a fairly young guy, so do the math there. That's, only 2 generations back takes me back to the Civil War, and a grandfather who was alive when I was alive. Everyone got married late, it seemed, through the generations in my family, and had their kids late. The benefit of that, though, is that I got to hear real stories of what it was like in the 1860s and how they lived, and what the evening was like, what the evening meal was like, how everyone, of course, not only ate together, you grew the food together, you prepared the food together, you ate together, and then after dinner, you would go into what we call the living room now, and you would read together, you would play music together, and that's the way my grandfather was raised, that's the way my mother was raised, and that's the way I was raised. There were musical instruments in the house, the television was not a babysitter, discussions were had, and that is not what's going on now.
I mean, when I was raised by 2 perfectly normal, probably extraordinarily loving parents who happened to have been President and First Lady, There weren't drugs for kids. There wasn't a need. There wasn't I don't remember the label ADD ever being used when I was in high school or grade school. So no, it's not something that my parents had to deal with.
Kids playing, splashing in the water, chasing each other, yelling, having a lot of fun. Where I grew up in a small town in West Virginia, that was normal. From the age of 1 to 6, you didn't have a whole lot of supervision. You went out in the daytime, you played, you built forts, you ran to each other's homes, got home by dinner time or lunch. Not true today. Today, we don't have children as much as we have little adults. In fact, we almost are obsessed about micromanaging the lives of our children.
You didn't have this high expectation among parents, particularly middle class and upper middle class parents, that kids had to achieve and start achieving really by infancy, when they start working out on their infant gyms, and then when they start their first classes as they're moving into 1.5 years or 2 years. Parents want to build a resume for their kids starting at these very, very young ages.
They are being pushed academically, they're pushed to achieve, and so what's happening is that the scale is becoming imbalanced. While the weight is on them to achieve, they're losing that ability to get out there and experience life in their own way.
They all used to look at me, the teacher, Mrs. Brady, the principal, and not focus on anybody else except me.
It was just very disturbing. As a parent, I felt like I didn't want my son in a different school, and I felt very pressured.
Mrs. Brady used to tell me that, she had eyes behind her head. Eyes behind her head, and she could see through walls.
The children who are the most energetic, the ones who have that creativity and energy, many of those children are getting into a lot of, quote, trouble because they're not falling into the groove. They're not falling into the pattern. They want to know. They can't wait their turn. They're raising their hand. That's not fair to them. I mean, what should be happening is that energy that they have, which is so beautiful, should be channeled. And it should be channeled into a direction where they can create with that and use that in a positive way, instead of it being used against them, that they're not following the, quote, norm.
This one can chew, and this one can do fireballs. And this one can do this. This one doesn't go down like this one does, and goes like... I'm asking you for just loudness. That's what it does. They're double shooters.
Approximately 10% of boys from ages 6 through 12 or so are taking psychotropic medication. And this is just an appalling statistic to me as a parent and as a physician.
In the early 90s, there was a huge spike in children being diagnosed ADHD and subsequently being put on Ritalin. At that time, several things happened. The federal government awarded schools more money based upon more children being diagnosed ADHD. And also for low-income families, if a child was diagnosed ADHD and put on Ritalin, the family received a lot more money monthly.
It's frightening how easy it is for children to be diagnosed. They are being diagnosed by school teachers and by school personnel of all types in all school districts across the country.
I don't think teachers are the best diagnosticians. They certainly are good observers. They can see what happens in a classroom. They can make good comments about what they see in a child, and that can be put into the diagnostic hopper. But I certainly do not agree that they're the ones who make a decision about whether a child should receive or not receive medication. If the child has a problem and needs medication, sure, he should be getting it. But let's leave the school out of it if we can.
You see this phenomena around the world where children are nearly considered a disease.
You don't quite see it around the whole world. It is mostly occurring in North America, in Australia, Great Britain, but beginning to occur on a mass scale around the world because of the efforts of America, which is exporting its way of looking at children.
There are many children in my practices, as well as other neurologists' practice, who are treating children with very severe neurological problems, like in the ADHD spectrum, where medications are extremely valuable and the child would not be able to function without the use of a medication. That's not where I have a problem with medicating children. The problem I have with medicating children is the error that we make of commission, where we're treating children who are just, struggling, but don't have ADHD, but are labeled ADHD because it gets them through the door to get that prescription for the Ritalin or another medication.
So I took him out of that school and I put him in another school. Everything was fine for a while until they got the records from the other school. Then the same thing happened. They started calling me at work saying, Vincent won't sit still, you need to come in and have a meeting. And again, I went to the meeting and they said, you have to put your son on Ritalin or we'll put him in a special school. I took him out of that school and put him in another school, Sunnyvale. And that is where they called CPS, Child Protective Services, and when I was at work, they took my son out of daycare and they put him in an institution. When I got home from work, there was a card on my door from a police officer, and it said, please call me regarding your son.
The Division of Family Services was originally set up to protect children, but I don't see that happening anymore.
Thank you for watching. We're out of time. I look forward to sharing more with you next week.